and I'm on the campus of Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore, Maryland. And this is sort of my second time in Baltimore. I think in the summer of 2020, Jason and I did a whole bunch of field work with my friends Vanessa and Rachel around Baltimore. And we went all the way out to like the Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Lab, and we went downtown. And there's a variety of campuses, but this is the main campus of Johns Hopkins. And I'll show you little dolls I made today. So here's today's heart. It has little conifer pods from this Chinese fir, and I put it under, I had a choice of trees, but I put it under a ginkgo tree because I thought that felt best. So, and we've got, I think that's some St. John's wort and pokeweed and redbud pods and some hydrangea, and I have a little shell on the acorn there, and the moms. So that's our offering here for Johns Hopkins. I'm right behind me is something called Krieger Hall, and Mr. Krieger was a Baltimore businessman, and he made his money in surgical staples. And he must have made a lot of money because he ended up giving donations to many institutions, arts institutions, health institutions, and quite a bit here to Johns Hopkins. And so I think they actually renamed their whole School in Arts and Sciences after Mr. Krieger. And again, it's sort of a medical overlay on all of this. And I was looking at Krieger Hall because it actually houses this center for cognitive science and minds and brains and education. And so again, because of the door I came in through education, so much of this mechanized social control system is not only about profit and control, but is also about trying to figure out what makes people tick, particularly their behaviors. And so all of this is really, so much of it is dual use, right? The things that are coming along are framed as, we're here to fix Alzheimer's, we're here to fix Parkinson's, we really want to know how the mind works. But ultimately, I think they want to know how the mind works because they're interested in, sorry, my little thing, they're interested in trying to give whatever our secrets of our living consciousness to their machines, which I don't think will work, but they're still trying really hard to get it. So I often reference the Quakers because, again, I'm originally from Philadelphia, and I feel like a lot of this, beyond Johns Hopkins, which I've talked about, particularly Michael Bloomberg's gifts and donations to Johns Hopkins to make this a data-driven sort of society, I didn't realize that Johns Hopkins was a Quaker school. Johns Hopkins himself, he came from a family of a Quaker family. They had tobacco plantations. I think the Dome of Domination, the bell ringing. Okay, so the Johns Hopkins, keep going. Okay, so they divested themselves of their slaves, and then he later became a wholesale dealer, a mercantile dealer in Baltimore. And this was during the early 19th century, and he made a lot of money sorry, it's hard for me to concentrate. I've been doing these like for the last couple days. Okay, so the family was tobacco. He made money in mercantile, and for the settlers who were going out into the Ohio country and leaving from Baltimore and going overland, they made a lot of money in those sales. So he made quite a bit of money and then ultimately helped to found the school. He was also active in the Baltimore and Ohio railroad system. So again, I think we need to consider the broadband and satellite geofencing. Communications for the metaverse is not unlike the railroad, the fortunes made in the railroad in the 19th century and the canals. So I'm going to read just for a second out of this Quakernomics book. I'm about halfway through, you can sort of see here. And this chapter 11 is called, I'm not going to read the whole chapter, just a section here, Quakers in Public Life. And I think it really speaks to this idea of civil society and nonprofits and this idea of democracy and that everyone's going along in the social system, but that maybe we didn't actually have a say in it, because the Quakers that he's talking about are mostly in the United Kingdom, and these were people that, due to their well-connected networks, were able to get access to capital and make a lot of money. Make a lot of money. And so they were the ones who were benevolent, but they were also the ones in control. So they were calling the shots in terms of the game. So in chapter 1, it goes Quakers in public life. And I don't know if you can hear, the cicadas are really loud today. In the first publication to draw together Quaker business achievements, Paul Emden's Quakers in Commerce of 1939, the Quaker legacy is summed up like this. Quakerism indeed made its chief impression not as one might perhaps expect upon theology or philosophy, but upon social history. And in almost every department of social and moral progress, amelioration of housing conditions, social organization of factories, relief of the poor and sick, care for the insane, protection of the Aborigines, prison reform, revision of the criminal code, suppression of the opium trade, international arbitration, Quakers were amongst the pioneers, and very often they stood alone. Emden adds a few further items: abolition of slavery, promotion of the temperance movement, at times Quakers were in the lead, and education of children and adults. So Johns Hopkins is very big in education, and particularly educational technology. Quakers also sat on all kinds of public bodies, roles that might be unpaid, attract only expenses, or be remunerated at levels significantly lower than comparable executive roles in commerce. Put broadly, we can call this a participation in public or civic life. And wherever that participation flowed from principles which Quakers held ahead of their time, we can give it the contemporary name of activism. And as we have seen, Quakers were not divided between those who entered public life on the one hand and those who engaged in commerce on the other. They were mostly one and the same individual, and this is what gives Quakeronomics its character. At the same time, the history of Quaker persecution tinged this participation in public life, whoa, the cicadas are really loud, with a continuous consciousness of the outsider, one who not so easily forgets those still in poverty are despised by the mainstream. So what they're saying is essentially, because the Quakers were outsiders in England, but they also helped. Abraham Darby was sort of the person who catalyzed the Industrial Revolution, and they were the heads of many industries during the 18th and early 19th century. They had access to capital and networks, and then because of their faith, they were willing to sort of not necessarily maximize that capital and instead devote time and attention to civic life, but it was balanced, right? And so I think that is connected to those public-private partnerships, that civil society is the civilizing force, is the domesticating force, but then we've gotten to the point now where we're looking at cognitive neuroscience and mechanistic approaches to cognitive neuroscience, and the control systems that we have and the concentration of power in the people who are financing those control systems are really unsettling. And you know, they bring so many people in to do the research, and it's all dual use. So for every potentially nefarious use, there's a nice cover excuse for what you're doing. And so most people who go into these things aren't going into them for bad reasons. They just don't understand. Like, they're telling them, they're living in the story where everything that they do is good. They're not living in the story that everything that they do is going to be weaponized by defense contractors. And we're getting there, though. And Johns Hopkins was one of the first schools of public health funded by the Rockefellers. And I'll put a link to the fieldwork we did last. Well, and I don't know that it's infiltrated. I think it's a matter of the system. Someone asked about people. Is there any organization that's not being infiltrated? And if you look at how they study, like swarm intelligence, collective consciousness, emergent behavior, essentially there are rules. Like, there are rules that are put in place in these mathematical models, and then they run the simulation. So it's not as though there's some plan and that people who are in on it know the plan, and they go and infiltrate organizations. It's that our whole operating system of civil society is not up to date with our technology. Like, we've never dealt with the dominance principle, I think. You know, like the bells ringing. We've never dealt with our place in relation to nature, with our capacities, and increasingly we're moving into an engineering mindset where everything is engineered, and that's lifted up as good, right? That's lifted up as efficient and accountable, and but the messy chaos of nature and these crazy cicadas, that's factored out of the equation. Like that's not going to show up in any of the simulations, right? And so when I'm pulling in, you know, and I wasn't sure if I was going to bring the, you know, the dolls and the hearts, but I've got, you know, I brought my basket and I brought my little snipping shears, and, you know, I'm wandering through the campus because actually I feel like this is part of what I do, is go and look. And, you know, this is a very expensive school. The landscaping leaves a bit to be desired, and this is right at the time where all of the parents are coming to drop off kids. So, like, there was a lot of sort of wild vegetation, overgrowth and things out there, which I like because I like saying hi to those plants and trimming them, and they have a role. But anyway, so I'm pulling through, like, both the cultivated things, the weeds, pulling them together and laying them out. And that frame is important because I pulled in and the visitor parking lot was in the engineering building. And the first thing I come out and I see Carnegie Institute. And then I see the Olin Hall, which is Olins are the people who funded all the physics labs. And so I'm like surrounded by engineering. Like, even in education, it's not a human-based education, it's an engineered education. We're going to engineer your cognition so that you can be the best you, the most optimal you. But maybe you didn't get a chance to figure out what your pathway was, like what that actually is about. But there's lots of money to be made, both on the technology, on the research, on the computing, on the AI systems of harvesting. Like, it's biocapitalism is what it is. And that's what the knowledge economy is. That's what the data economy. So I don't think it's infiltration. I think it's like an egregore. And I'm not trying to like point fingers and say, you good, you bad. It's to zoom out. And I think when I'm saying zooming out to this Quakernomics, it goes back to Rome, right? But at least in my consciousness with the Industrial Revolution, definitely the 18th century. And that's the stuff we have to get it together for Philadelphia and for Baltimore and for these early, Boston, oh my gosh, and, you know, and New York, these early colonial cities, and the ways in which faith and governance and evolving technologies led to some people deciding for everyone else what is the way to be, and then increasingly coming up with ways to enforce it. So when the Quakers are sitting on all these boards deciding things and patting themselves on the back for being good people, they're the ones who are setting the mold for the civilization process. And soon, I think it's going to be a problem. So I'm terrible with my books. I took a bunch of notes in the front cover. And like I said, I'm not going to touch on, you could go on forever with going through Johns Hopkins. In any university, any major public or private university is going to have many alumni and professors and people doing intense things. And I would actually invite you that if you are living in a college town, you know, start to go through the departments and just look and see what research is being done, see who's doing it. Because again, it's not actually hidden. It's just tucked away in places that it's all become socially acceptable. So I can't in any way go over the breadth of Johns Hopkins. And I'm not going to even touch on the public health part because I did that before, and I'll put a link when I get home to that Baltimore field visit where we went to the School of Public Health, which was originally set up by Rockefeller and endowed by Michael Bloomberg, and that's going to be for all of these wellness behavioral control systems, control grid, sorry. Let's see, the sun is coming out. So I'm not even really going to talk about the public health stuff, but the School of Education is also really big, and other things. So I'm going to highlight 4 people who have ties to Johns Hopkins, and this, I feel like it gives a narrative arc to some of the things that are embedded in this school. Okay, so first, as I was driving in, there was something under construction, and there's actually this Agora Center at Johns Hopkins. So it's like the Johns Hopkins Agora Institute. And it's all about democracy, right? It's all about, again, the story that we're participating in. And it was funded by a $150 million gift in 2017 by this person, Stavros Niarchos. And Stavros Niarchos is a Greek shipping magnet, whatever. Like he made all of his money, he's in Greek and he made his money in shipping. He must have made a lot of money because a $150 million gift is a pretty big gift. So what he's about for this institute is that they are going to come up with groups of academics to look at research that's being done and then apply it to the real world, right? So they're the translators of this high-level academic research. So they're bringing the research and they're making it democratic, and they're going to make everyone go along and they're going to make it sound really good, right? Like we're going to be, participating only, instead of the Greek agora, we're going to have blockchain, Web 3.0 digital identity participation tokens. Like that's the new agora for, the Greek, and it's interesting because, all of this is connected to the Platonic solids and, these field theories. But so situate that, right? The story that's being told is that this is democratic, that everyone's agreed on it. But again, it's being funded by people who can give $150 million donations to make this thing happen. And okay, so that's one. So the Stavros Niarchos Foundation has also made some donations. I checked Little Sis right before I came. StoryCorps, right? Because they're building the narrative. So the StoryCorps, all in NPR, come tell us your stories. Playworks, which is a rubric for play in school. So everyone has to play correctly according to a rubric, and that's going to be impact finance. And there's money from Battelle going into that, but Mr. Niarchos is part of that. Salzburg Global Seminar, if you look it up, they're actually very central to the social emotional learning program and getting all of that data for the AI. And he was also donating to Chatham House and things like Leading Change and various civic groups, right? Because they need, in order to belong to society, you need to play by the rules, and these are the rules. And so you establish the frameworks and the clubs and the belongingness. And so that's what these agoras will do, is create the belongingness. Another person, his name was C. Michael Armstrong. He was the board chair of Johns Hopkins Medical School around 2005 to 2012. Now, his contribution, he went to, I think he graduated from the University of Ohio, Miami, and he worked most of his career at IBM. So he started out, and I think back then you could just have a bachelor's degree, and if you were good, in business, you could just go pretty far. So he ended up working there for 30 years, starting in 1961. And he became chair of sort of their international division, the World Trading Corporation of IBM. So he was the one who took IBM's technologies into Europe and the rest of the world. And after he retired from IBM, he became the chair of Hughes Electronics. So Hughes Electronics, I mentioned that yesterday at the Howard Hughes Medical Institute, that when Howard Hughes died, Hughes Aircraft was sold because it was the sole asset of the Howard Hughes Medical Institute, and they needed to diversify their portfolio, so they sold it to GM, General Motors, and I believe Boeing. And it spun out. More domination. Okay, I'm just going to wait till the bells are done. Sorry. This one might be longer. But it's a good reminder, right? And I remember back in the day, you hear these bells and you just feel so good, right? Like you just feel like, oh, I'm in, it creates this environment. Okay. Oh, this is probably going to be 11 bells. So, but you like the chime of the bells. Like we're trained to like the chime of those bells. And not that I think it sounds, oh, you can hear me. Okay, well, so I'll keep going. So he went to Hughes Electronics. So Hughes Aircraft was split. It went to GM and Boeing. Part of it became Hughes Electronics. And then eventually that became into DirecTV. So that's interesting when you consider about frequency, broadcast, reality construction. So he was in charge of DirecTV and expansion of a lot of satellite TV and radio. And I touched on that, again, looping back to the Capital One Center and Intelsat and the satellite communications, that really this resonance of a weaponized frequency atmosphere is going to be embedded into our consciousness, into our bodies. And this all goes back to, stupid DirecTV and, satellite radios and radios in your cars and stuff. First they go for the car and then they go for your brain. And then in 1997, he became the CEO of AT&T. And again, these telecommunications companies now, it's not just your phone, right? It's the entire smart sensor networks. It's the communications networks. And so AT&T is I think it's headquartered in Dallas now. And so that's part of the whole Dallas being a big smart city and a digital twin city. But, I keep thinking, like, what's going to happen? We never really thought that the prison was going to be run by our cable company and our phone company. company, but that seems to be how it goes. So he went from Hughes Electronics to AT&T, and then to board chair of Comcast. And of course, Comcast is based in Philadelphia, where the headquarters of that. And you know, they want to control how you see the world. They want to control all of the information. And now with personalized data analytics, you know, they can deliver the reality that they think you need to see through all of these digital devices. So during that time, he was a professor visiting professor at MIT, and he was involved with the, no surprise, Federal Communications Commission, and sorry, this light is a little bad. Federal Communications, FCC, also Homeland Security and Defense. So I think we have to understand that all of these communications devices are really weapon systems, even including this thing that I'm doing right now. It's all managing reality. You know, I'm trying to sort of poke some holes with, you know, my little ladies, you know, in the bubble of the social media bubble. But yeah, the frequency stuff, it is creating our reality that we're living in, unless you go wander around campuses and collect weeds and turn them into hearts. Okay, so that's C. Michael Armstrong. And again, you can imagine someone who is connected to IBM. Oh, and it said that he connected with Johns Hopkins because IBM told all their high-level executives they were supposed to adopt a hospital system, right? So IBM knows how to make its markets. They're like, go adopt a hospital system, and the one he adopted was Johns Hopkins. So, okay, so hospital, electronics, frequency, and yeah, communication. And imagine that, again, bio-nanotechnology. So the next person is Daniel Gorfin. And I found Daniel Gorfin early on in the lockdowns when they were having these early hearings on programmable currency. He went to Brown undergraduate, Georgetown Law, and then he got a master's degree here at Johns Hopkins from the Paul Nitze School of Advanced International Studies. Okay, so and then he became like a consultant, a fellow, a professor in the business school here. Now, I didn't realize that this Nitze School of Advanced International Studies, like Zbigniew Brzezinski was a professor there. So that probably tells you something about how that works in terms of international policy. So he was a faculty here, but not on this campus. The business school, I think, is downtown from 2012 to 2016. Now, during that time, he was also a fellow with the Milken Institute, and that's Michael Milken. So this is free market economics and blockchain. So that's what the Milken Institute is about. And then when he left, he became part of something called Lab CFTC, which was a commodity futures innovation forum, right? So he's creating new commodities, and these commodities, I keep trying to like hit this on the head, is a way of packaging debt or indebtedness through UBI, through these things, to manage behavior change. That's going to be the commodity. The commodity is going to be just the outright impact data, and it's also going to be the bets placed on if you hit your behavior change targets. So these are these new and innovative systems. He founded something called Flourish Ventures, which is a social impact finance consultancy. He was working on small business loans, and then he was working on something called Gattaca, right? Gattaca Horizons, and they were working in the reg tech space, so regulations for technology and fintech. And again, that's the game, right? You have to set the policy first. You have to create the policy infrastructure for the capital flows. And that's what's been going on at least for a decade. And then in January of 2020, right, interesting timing, he co-founded the Digital Dollar Foundation. And so this digital dollar is going to be the programmable money. And, you know, I just want to emphasize, and I think I'm going to write a blog post about it sometime soon, maybe when I get back this week. We're talking a lot about crypto, and we're talking a lot about the problems with crypto, but I really feel in my heart that crypto should be a subset discussion of the conversation around Web 3.0, around the smart contract layer. Because if we, you know, I still feel that probably the vast majority of the conversation is around digital money. And it's related to like fraud around this digital money, digital assets like NFTs, the Ponzi scheme nature of it, all of which is true. I think increasingly there's going to be conversations around the energy issues around, and it's usually framed around the currency. It's not framed around Web3. They don't say we need to have concerns about the energy demands of living in an augmented reality world. They talk about it like Bitcoin. They talk about it like crypto, which I think for anyone who's actually in that space, they know that's a small, maybe not small, but it's much bigger than the actual money. That the Web3 is so much bigger, and that's what the conversation should be about. Because my frustration is that it gets channeled into these areas that are, again, very, I'm not saying they're not true, but I'm saying it's such a small piece, it feels deceptive because we're having the wrong conversation again. And I've been saying this again, sorry, I'm gonna move this around just with the light. We've been having the wrong conversations all this time. We keep having the wrong conversations. And once you get the framing wrong, you're never actually gonna get at the core of the matter. And the core of the matter is what it's like to live in a universe that was once dominated, maybe not dominated, it's not the right word, but the shift from living in a world of energetics that are based in natural systems to a world of mechanism and control, and that's the cybernetics. And so if you can do anything for me, please try to keep redirecting the conversation. Say, yes, fraud, yes, energy intensive. No, we don't want green crypto either. No, we don't want a green Web 3.0 with nuclear, power plants that are gonna, create radioisotopes to turn us more into some sort of automata game characters. We don't want any of that. But instead of dithering over those things, like what's the good crypto or CB, central bank digital currency, let's talk about the elephant in the room, which is the entire web structure, because it's not just about people, it's about nature too. So, so I guess that's Gorfin, right? And he was the chief the chief innovation guy for commodities futures trading, right? And again, that goes back to Chicago. That's the commodities trading, but that's also the Manhattan Project. That's the University of Chicago. That's the Chicago Boys economic construct. That system was always about control and hedging and gambling and bets. Okay, so the last person I'm going to talk about is a person named Shelly Pock. And this gets back to, this is something I found a number of years ago when I was working in the education space. This is someone who, I think he went to Harvard and maybe Catholic University. I wasn't quite clear on his LinkedIn education-wise undergraduate. And then he got a master's here at Johns Hopkins in the School of Education. And he became an expert in sort of augmented reality education, digital education. And again, we have to understand that as a military project. And so in way back in, in 2015, he was a panel expert on a forum called EdSim, so Education Simulations, that was put out by the U.S. Department of Education. He was one of their resident experts, and it was on virtual reality education. So again, that goes back 7 years, virtual reality education. They knew what was coming, and this is going to be linked to the competencies and the badging. He also co-founded something called Digital Harbor Foundation, and that's, Baltimore has this inner harbor. And actually, a lot of the Baltimore County is a hotbed of ed tech. Lots and lots of ed tech in Baltimore County. And so they have these lighthouse schools, and then they have this Digital Harbor, which is also pushing innovation in educational technology, especially for at-risk youth in low-income populations. And again, it's all about surveillance. It's all about the predictive analytics. But he was a co-founder of a foundation that helped support that. And then he's also on many, many committees of IEEE, the Institute of Electrical and Electronics Engineers, many, many committees. And he really is pushing the XAPI technology. And XAPI is the counterpoint to SCORM. Essentially, when they first started to do ed tech to be able to track the data in the cloud. And this was all happening in the mid-1990s, originally connected through the National Guard and the Navy, and then eventually going to all of federal employees and then out to other people. But they had something called SCORM, the Shareable Content Object Reference Module, which is when you were interacting with an online piece of information and the metadata tags, like how that data was captured. But it only worked on screen-based, like larger screen-based devices like laptops or desktop computers. It didn't work for ICT, like individual communication technology. It wouldn't work on tablets, it wouldn't work on phones, it wouldn't work on VR headsets. And so eventually a sort of a defense contracting firm called Problem Solutions, which is based in Johnstown, Pennsylvania, I think they were associated with the company they had originally done SCORM. They developed this XAPI, or called Tin Can API technology, that would pull the data off these other devices. Because, you know, moving forward, it's all about wearables, right? The Web3 is all about augmented reality and wearables. It's not, you're not walking around carrying around a laptop. It's going to be seamless. It's going to be in your contact lenses, or it's going to be projected through your brain waves, you know, into the. I know you're always like putting these cryptic things. If you could be a little more straightforward, it would be helpful. I'll look it up if you can give me something a little more straightforward about whatever. So the ICT technology, that's what he was about. And they were working very closely. So he co-founded a firm called Yet Analytics. And if you Google that in my blog, I've written several posts about it. But this Yet Analytics is the data tags off of all of this devices, and it's going to be for how you earn your badges and how they keep track of your social capital. And I have, and I'll link to it afterwards, a short clip that I pulled where he's talking about using this technology essentially in hyper-Taylorism, right? The most extreme, intense level of competition and like Fordism, right? Like speeding up the industrial mechanism, speeding up the assembly line, to the point that everyone in the world, because this is going to touch everyone in the world, right? This is not just a US problem. This is not just a Europe problem. This is coming after all of us. And, you know, he's perfectly pleased with that. And yet Analytics has worked very closely with Hewlett Packard. Hewlett Packard, as I've mentioned in the Aralaga Andreessen talk, it helped create the field of philanthropy to be data-driven. They created OER, Open Education Resources, soon to be Open Education Virtual Reality Resources to underpin all of this. So it's almost like we're in a game, or we're acting out a play. Like, and none of it's, like, how much of it, is that even real? Like, when you get in that space, is that even real? And increasingly, and this is something I'm going to spend a little more time on, and I know Steffers is working on this, but you know, it's going to veer into photonics, right? Because the electrons are out of date. Like, they can't move the amount of data transmission that they need through Web3 through the old electrical engineering systems. It's going to be optics and photonics. It's going to be light. It's going to be communication message through light. And so I'll just sort of close this out by saying that the Quakers, again, George Fox was the founder of Quakerism, and they called themselves the children of the light. And so I wonder to what extent this control system at all levels, from the cells to the consciousness to the society, through the agora, the health systems, the transportation systems, the housing systems, that somehow they think that this is about turning us into some sort of enlightened state, when really it's capturing us and putting us in a box. So I'm just going to sign off with my little beauty frequency bowl here. So thank you for listening in. Hopefully the connection was okay this time. I have some more videos I'll be uploading when I get home today.